Part 5. So Jesus defeats the enemy by being slaughtered by him. That qualifies him to join the Father on the throne and reestablishes the worthiness of the Father on the throne. God sits on the throne not as a dictator or violent. He's peaceful. He will accept violence, but he will not dish it out. Revelation 5, 12 and 13, New Living Translation. Look what happens after Jesus is slaughtered by the devil. Look. And they sang in a mighty chorus, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slaughtered to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing." Why can he go to the throne? With power and honor and blessing and strength? Because he was slaughtered. This tells us a lot about the peaceful nature of God's rule. He is not the direct active agent of violence in this cosmic war. Satan is. And yet the Christian church as a whole has said that God is dumping seals, trumpets and plagues on the people when it's the devil. And that's what we're going to see as we travel through this. Now look at verse 13. Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and the sea. They sang, "Blessing and honor and glory and power belong to the one sitting on the throne and to the Lamb forever and ever." And it's all because the Lamb was slain, that the worthiness of the one sitting on the throne is reestablished. I rule from peace. I share the rule. I will absorb violence. Satan can character assassinate me, and I'll let it play out. And I'll demonstrate my character on the throne through Jesus, who is slaughtered. But that doesn't mean that God won't act on evil. He will. But from the premise of peace. Not as one who perpetrates violence, but from the premise of absorbing violence and becoming a victim to violence. Let's have a look now at the issue of the scroll. Why did the scroll trigger this crisis? Why? Well, first of all English translations, I will admit, say this in 5.1 English Standard Version. Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll in the right hand. The Greek doesn't say that, and although my case is not dependent on this, this really helps fill out what's going on here. It's not in his hand, it's at his right hand. At his right hand, not in. The Greek phrase is very clear. Number one, it doesn't say at right hand. The word hand is not there in the Greek. It says at the right. And translated, so at the right. What? In his right hand? No, at the right hand. The Greek is epi ten dexian. This is the only time it appears in the whole Bible, but it does appear many times in the first 7 centuries of the Christian era in Greek literature, and it always, without exception, unambiguously means not in the right hand, but at the right hand. But it's not in the hand. It's in the right hand side. Royal thrones in Bible times were huge. They were couches. So there were others that could sit on the couch. Now, let's get to the Old Testament background of the throne being in the hand or out of the hand. Yeah? This is huge, and it really helps expand what's going on here. In the Old Testament, we have a mandate, a rule book that governed how Israelite kings were to rule. When they were sitting on the throne, they had to have the book of the law, the handbook on how to be a king. And when he had it in his hand, he was authorized to rule. And in fact, at the king's coronation, what made him king was not a crown or any words, it said. It's when he takes the scroll in his hand. That act is what made him king. So the idea of a scroll being in the right hand, I'll show you now, is what makes the king authorized, and he is worthy to rule and sit on the throne because the book is in his hand. So if it's not in his hand, which is what we see in chapter 5 of Revelation, God's authority to rule has been challenged. Let's have a look at the passages. Deuteronomy 17, 16 to 17. I'll go through this quickly, yeah? NIV. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more horses. For the Lord God has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. He's got to be humble. He can't get too rich, or power's going to go to his head. Okay? So here are qualifications of being a king. Verses 18 and 19 of Deuteronomy 17 NIV. Listen to this. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the Levitical priests. This scroll, it is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life. The scroll in the hand is what made him a righteous king. And in fact, it goes further than that. The scroll has to be in his hand. When it's placed in his hand, that's when he becomes king. 2 Kings 11:12. Listen to this. It's what gives him the right to rule is the scroll in the hand. 2 Kings 11:12, NIV. Jehoiada brought out the king's son. He's going to be coronated. And put the crown on him. He's not king yet. What acts gives him legal right to be king? Jehoiada brought out the king's son, put the crown on him, and he presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king. Oh, when he was given that scroll in his hand, that's the act that proclaimed him king. He was not king just because he was the son. Nope. He was not king just because he put the crown on him. He presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king. They anointed him, and the people clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" What gave him the right to rule? Not sonship, not crown. When the book, the king's mandate, his rule book, was put in his hand, long live the king. Wow. So let's go back to chapter 5, verse 1, knowing that the Greek says it's not in his hand. 5:1, ESV. Then I saw at the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll within. Crisis! The scroll, the authority to rule, is not in God's hand. It's now out of God's hand. God's right to rule, the authority, is now out of his hand. He puts it on the large throne, on the couch, and now says, oh no, he's no longer worthy. Because the rule book that authorized him to be king is not in his hand. Now, my interpretation is not based on that, but I'll tell you what, man, this sure as heck fills out what's going on here. And John, who was steeped in the Old Testament, and the 7 churches who were also steeped in the Old Testament, knew that the scroll not to be in the hand, it was supposed to be with him at all times. That thing that gave him the rule and the authority and the right to become king and sit on the throne and make decisions was out of his hand. I'm suggesting God is questioned, so he abdicates. He allows question on his rule. The devil did this. So he said, okay, put this on the side. And then, oh no, he's not worthy. And then Jesus enters and he can take it and he joins the Father. Why? Because he was slaughtered. Then he takes the scroll, 3:21, and he joins the Father on the throne. God allows himself to be questioned. His right to rule is not in his hand. And he lets it play out. More next time.